Welcome to 2819. This is the show where we aim to inspire you to make disciples of all nations. I'm Sandra Dimes.
And I'm Brian Rombacher, and this is a television outreach of Reasons to Believe, a viewer-supported ministry where science and faith converge.
And we really want to remind you, again, we're viewer-supported, so if you enjoy this show even a little bit, consider supporting us. Visit reasons.org/2819.
And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit that subscribe button below. We want you to stay up to date on all the new videos Reasons to Believe is producing.
And you can also stay up to date with us on our social media pages. So you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We're at 2819 Show, and we'd love to hear from you.
And if you just want to listen to us while you're doing other things, you can download the podcast version of 2819. It's available on Apple Podcasts and Google Play. Just search Reasons to Believe Podcast. And
we want to let you know about an exciting new resource that we have available from frequent 2819 guest and RTB scholar Ken Samples.
Ken has authored this new book called Classic Christian Thinkers, where he highlights 9 of Christianity's most famous and notable theologians, philosophers, and apologists.
Yes, and this book is a great resource to help you grow in your knowledge of Christianity and to give to someone new to faith.
If you want to get your copy today, please visit reasons.org/2819.
Well, now it's time for a rundown. In our Nexus segment, we're going to hear from Bijan Nemati, and he's going to answer the question, how can we help young people navigate science-faith issues?
And in Culture Talk, Sandra's going to be talking with Ken Samples about understanding Lent, which is really awesome because I wasn't taught that growing up, but I know there's a lot more denominations that are aware of it and that celebrate it. So really looking forward to that one.
The Lenten season, we'll dive into that. In our Give and Take segment, Jeff will be talking about what's new in science.
And in RTB 101, Anastasia Young will be talking to Hugh Ross about what were Job's Leviathan and Behemoth. Let's check those out.
Now it's time for RTB 101. This is the segment where we talk about practical questions to equip our viewers to share their faith with their friends and family more effectively. I'm here with Dr. Ross, and Hugh, there are a couple of creatures in the book of Job that I would like to know more about. That is the Leviathan and the Behemoth. Now, these sound like really scary animals with the bones like bronze, and they breathe fire. And are these actual living creatures, or are they something mythological that the writer made up?
They're actually living creatures, and yes, they're very terrifying. You need to read it in the larger context. It's talking about the soulish animals that God designed to relate to us and serve and please us. But it's making the point that some are more difficult to tame than others. These are the 2 most difficult to tame of all. And if you're not careful, they're going to do you real harm.
It sounds like it.
Well, for centuries, Christian scholars have concluded that this must refer to the crocodile and the hippopotamus. And if you read the description of the Behemoth, it's clearly not a carnivore, it's a vegetarian. But when you get close to it, it gets territorial and it's going to do you some damage. I've been to Africa several times, and I've noticed that the crocodiles like to hang around the hippos because they know that people are not going to be able to see the hippos. They kind of submerge themselves in muddy water, so they're hard to see. But when you come into their territory, they're going to capsize your boat, and the crocodiles get lunch.
Now, it seems to me that the pictures of hippos I've seen have been cute and adorable, like you see with children's books and, on Noah's Ark. And so it's not true. Hippos are...
They're incredibly dangerous creatures.
Really?
Unless you raise the hippo from the time it's born. Like, say, if the mother hippo dies in birth, and then humans raise that baby hippo, the hippo will bond with the humans, and they can become a pet. But it's extraordinarily difficult to tame it. That's about the only way you're going to do it. Same thing with a crocodile. The only way you're going to tame it is to take it the moment it comes out of its egg. You want to handle it every day, and you don't want to miss a day. That's how difficult it is to tame. And there's very few of these creatures that have ever been tamed. But notice how the book Job ends. It says, notice it takes a higher being to tame these creatures. Likewise, it takes a higher being to tame us, because it says, there's one animal you've never been able to tame. You've not been able to bring humility to a proud human heart. Just like it takes a higher being to tame the hippo, it takes a higher being to tame a human being. And some of us are more challenging to tame than others. Some of us are like the crocodile and the behemoth. And I think what confuses people is how frequently Job in those two texts, 40 and 41, uses the word as and like. So it's highly metaphorical. And some of what you're reading there is giving you a literal description of these animals. Other passages are giving you a metaphorical description. 21 times you see the words like and as. And the metaphor is describing how you're going to feel if you have a close encounter with one of those wild creatures. You might as well, that creature might as well be breathing fire and smoke for all the good a stick is going to do in your hand to defend yourself. It might as well have bones of bronze for all the good a rock in your hand is going to do to defend yourself in a close encounter with these creatures. It's describing how you're going to feel in a close encounter.
I have friends that take this as these are dinosaurs, and I can see that from a straightforward reading of the book of Job, with the scales and with the ground shaking when they walk and the terror that they, inflict upon people, that it could be presumed that these are dinosaurs. Why do you not take that interpretation?
Well, I can see why, because a dinosaur is a terrible lizard. It's a scary creature. And I think it's the metaphorical passages. But if you take those metaphors literally, they do not fit dinosaurs. They don't fit any creature. No creature breathes fire out of its mouth. No creature has limbs of bronze. It talks about the tail swinging like a cedar tree. That's the one where it says it's got to be a dinosaur. Only dinosaurs have these gigantic tails.
Right. Well, how do you answer that?
The Hebrew word there is the word zanab, which means not just the tail part, but the entire hindquarters. Have you ever seen the hindquarters of a hippopotamus? They're enormous. And that's the weapon that a hippo uses to capsize your canoe or boat. It'll do this rapid swinging motion with its hindquarters, and it'll destroy your boat. And the crocodiles are there waiting.
Wow. Well, I have a question that beyond just the fun fact of that this could be the behemoth and Leviathan could be the crocodile and the hippo. How can I use this to validate the validity of Scripture, to just show the validity of Scripture?
Well, the most common response I get here is, doesn't the Bible ever hint about dinosaurs anywhere? I say, well, the Bible's written for all generations. It's only going to use vocabulary that all generations can comprehend. So Neanderthals aren't mentioned, protons aren't mentioned, and dinosaurs aren't mentioned. But here's where they fit in the Bible. Psalm 104, it's a property of all life to die off, but God recreates and renews the face of the earth. And if you look at all of Psalm 104, it's talking about God packing the earth with as much life as possible, as diverse as possible. If you want dinosaurs, you have to have very large, shallow seas. You need that water to support their bodies. The only way you can have a creature that massive. So when the earth had those shallow seas, God created dinosaurs, packed the earth with dinosaurs. But notice we don't have big, shallow seas today. Biggest animal you can have on land is the elephant.
That is just absolutely fascinating.
Now in the ocean, you got a whale.
That's true.
But it's got water.
If you'd like to hear more from Hugh, go to reasons.org and check out Hugh's blog, Today's New Reasons to Believe. Next up is the Nexus segment, where Bijan Nemati will share with us how we can help young people navigate science-faith issues.
Bijan, you're a physicist and you're a Christian, and I'm glad that you're here today because you can help maybe address parents and students who are involved in homeschooling when it comes to issues involving science. And you are particularly suited for this question because you have actually educated your kids at home, is that right?
That's right.
Have been involved in teaching other homeschooled kids science. So tell us a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, we some years ago now, because our children are mostly grown, decided we were going to try out homeschooling, and by and large, it has its challenges, but by and large, we're very glad that we did it. But I certainly, had to. There are certain parts of it where you really have to figure out how you're going to do some things that you normally would send off the kids to be taken care of. And so one of them is, of course, how do you do science? Now, in our home, I am a physicist. My wife studied zoology, so we had things mostly covered in the science area. But we also found ourselves in a community of Christian homeschoolers in various cities that we've lived, each case where, that may not be the training of the parents. And then the question is, what do you do? And often what parents do is you can get either a curriculum that basically is very much carries all the load, or you can do cooperatives, and the cooperatives often include people who have had some science training who can do those. So we found that part worked fine, basically, in terms of just the mechanics of how do you go about doing this. It's a good time to be doing homeschooling just because of the richness of the curriculum material that's out there for teaching science. In my case, also what I did, which was a little bit more than average, was I taught a physics course for high school students, and we really went all out. We had very fancy experiments, and was a lot of fun to do it. So I did that, I think, 2 different years in the past 10 years.
Now, what are some maybe concepts or principles that you could communicate to parents and to students in general about science faith issues, particularly in a homeschool environment?
Yeah, one thing is that I guess we have to be careful about is that in a typical case, you hear about your faith at home and at church. You hear about science sometimes through the media, sometimes through documentaries. Sometimes, if you're not homeschooling, you're in public school. You hear it at the public school, of course. And what we find is that sometimes these things look like they're separate from each other, so that some kids will have the perception that their faith is unscientific, and some kids will have the perception that the science is ungodly, that they're either one doesn't match the criteria of the other. And of course, as Christians, what we have to remember is that God is the God of all truth, that is all one coherent understanding, so that the interpretation is something we have to be careful, but the description of science, we can really pretty much use the description as it comes, most of the times without too much trouble. It is important to have a proper foundation, is philosophical and theological foundation for the way you do science. But homeschoolers can do that. So definitely do not avoid science. It is a way of seeing God's glory. It is really part of our calling. It is what Christians invented, after all, in many cases, in many fields of science. So it's very much the Christian's business to be engaged in science and learning of science. Be not afraid of it, and just apply yourself to it, and use good materials. And there are good materials out there.
If you'd like to hear more from Bijan, Nemati, and our scholar community, go to reasons.org and search for our Voices blog. Now it's time for Culture Talk. This is the segment where we talk about the intersection of science, faith, and pop culture, and how culturally relevant topics can be used to start conversations about your faith. I'm joined with Ken Samples.
Hello. Thank
you for joining me. You are RTB's, we call you our philosopher and theologian, and you're great at explaining any questions we have about the Bible. You used to actually be the Bible answer man. So
I pretended.
You pretended, but you did well. And, during this season, for some believers, we are fully immersed in what we call the Lenten season.
Yes.
Or the season of Lent. But not everybody knows what that is.
That's right.
We grew up Catholic, so we know it well. So let's dive into that. What is the season of Lent?
Yeah, the reason why lots of Christians don't know about Lent is it's part of the traditional liturgical calendar, which is very strongly used in the Catholic Church, the Orthodox Church, the Anglican Church, to a lesser extent in the Lutheran Reformed tradition. But lots of Christians they don't have a liturgical calendar, so they wouldn't be familiar with Lent. But Lent is a time of repentance. It's a time of reflection. It's modeled after the 40 days Jesus spent in the desert. So it's after Ash Wednesday, leading up to Good Friday, and ultimately Easter Sunday.
So we talked about then who would observe it. So we're talking about who again?
Catholics, Orthodox, Anglicans, sometimes Methodists.
So our pals who are Protestant, who are non-denominational, a whole other slew.
They probably think it's stuff on your clothing you get out of the dryer.
Right, because we see people with with a sign of the cross, really, or a
Ash
cross
Wednesday,
on Ash Wednesday, and they go, oh, what's that smudge right there?
That's right.
So for our Protestant friends, we can explain to them again that it's like the 40 days of Christ.
Yeah, and it's an inference drawn from Scripture.
Mm-hmm.
Some people are sometimes concerned that Lenten practices are not as grace-oriented as they ought to be. But who can fault a time of reflection, a time of repentance, anticipation of the Lord's coming, His death and resurrection? So I think Lent can be a very positive spiritual experience.
So you talked about Lent practices. Let's delve into what are some of those practices?
Well, again, just as Jesus would be in the desert, it would be a time maybe where you would fast. It may be a time where you would address some of the struggles that you have in your spiritual life. And it would be a time maybe where you're very attentive. You try to be very attentive to God's love and His grace and His forgiveness.
Right. And something probably you might have practiced, I know I practiced when I was Catholic, is that we fast from a particular thing. We might pick chocolate or whatever it is that we're struggling with. Even now we think of mobile devices. I'm going to fast from a mobile device.
There you go.
That's kind of a good thing to do in general. But when we think about the season of Lent, it's drawing us to, again, this calendar, this spectacular moment in the calendar that we should observe, which is looking at Christ's death and resurrection.
Yeah, I think the way of thinking about it, Sandra, is that as Christians, our whole life is now caught up into Jesus's life. And Lent, I think we should keep an eye on grace. It shouldn't be kind of a works righteousness idea, but it can be very fruitful, I think.
And you're bringing up the works, and so we talk about works and faith, and how are we gaining our salvation. And sometimes it can seem scary. I don't want to give up something because I know that doesn't draw me necessarily closer to God.
That's right.
So how do we look at that?
Yeah, well, I think biblically we're saved by grace. It's through faith. It's in Christ. It's not by works, but saving faith inspires good works. So if we think of good works as our love for God, wanting to honor God, not putting us in acceptance before God, but I think in light of grace, Lent and those practices of the church year can be very helpful, very meaningful to me.
So if you have someone who isn't sure what's going on, they might see someone who's engaging in the Lenten practices. How would you use that to start a conversation about your faith?
Yeah, very good. I think I would immediately draw them to the idea that Lent is connected to the person of Jesus, to His life and His suffering, His preparation for the cross. So I think you could say that, look, these practices in the church are modeled after the life-death of Christ. And who do we think He is? Why do Christians view Him so significantly? And I would share why we think Jesus is unique.
And one resource that people can pick up, they won't necessarily learn about Lent, but they'll learn about what we believe and what we believe about Jesus. They can pick up your new book, Classic Christian Thinkers.
Yeah, I like it. Very good.
So I highly recommend that book. If you want to check it out, visit reasons.org/2819. In March and April, you can get this resource as a gift for any donation and any amount. Next, we're going to head over to Give and Take, and we're going to see what Jeff is up to. Let's check it out.
Hello, Jeff Zwerenk again here with Give and Take, the segment of our show where we look at important scientific topics and how they equip you to be better prepared to share the gospel. Today I'm joined by President and Founder of Reasons to Believe, Dr. Hugh Ross, and we're going to ask the question, will humans ever travel in space? Hugh, it's good to have you here again today.
Thank you.
So this is, obviously, we've traveled out into space, we've gone to the moon, we've put people orbiting the Earth, but we're talking about Star Wars, Star Trek, going off to distant planets, distant galaxies, those sorts of things. What are some of the problems that arise with that, and do you think we're ever actually going to be able to travel in space like that?
Well, there's a research paper just got published making the point that we're talking really short distances.
Short distances being?
Like to the moon and back.
To the moon and back, okay.
But going to Mars, which is like the next jump up, they said they're basically concluding that's out of the question because you get outside the Earth's magnetosphere And so they did experiments in the lab with mice and rats. And they chose mice and rats because their digestive tract is very similar to the digestive tract of humans. And what they discovered is that when they exposed these mice and rats to the kind of cosmic ray bath that they would get if they were outside the Earth's magnetosphere, does incredible damage to their digestive tract.
Okay, so let's come back to that. Just kind of step back to help people understand here. So Earth has a magnetic field around it. So that as charged particles, cosmic rays come in, those things don't make it down to the surface of the Earth, correct?
Correct.
What happens to them?
Well, you basically have got kind of a cone-like funnel around the Earth that acts as like a magnetic shield. And so it prevents the really deadly cosmic rays from impacting creatures on the surface of the Earth.
Okay, so it shields inside the planet, and presumably,
You're inside
even up
that,
into the space station, I thought we've got pretty good shielding from it, correct?
Yeah, the space station is 100% protected by Earth's magnetosphere, so no problem going to the space station. The moon, often the moon is inside our magnetosphere. Okay. And if you're outside, you're only outside for a day or two. And basically that's what the experiment said that they did on the mice and rats, is that if we're talking a few days, not a problem. Once you get past a month, and particularly when you get past 3 months, the impact is debilitating. In other words, an astronaut in a spaceship that spends 3 months outside of our magnetosphere would have his digestive tract or her digestive tract so utterly destroyed that they would cease to be able to function. Right. And if you leave them much longer, they die.
Okay. So let's I want to explore what the details of some of how that plays out or what's going on there. But so are they actually sending mice out into space,
no,
or how are they doing this?
It's all done in the lab. Okay. But since we know what the radiation and
where do they get their where do they get the radiation? I guess that's the question.
Yeah, since we know what the radiation environment is like outside the magnetosphere, in the lab they expose these mice to exactly the radiation environment you'd be exposed to outside the magnetosphere. And basically what you're looking at is you get a lot of these heavy nuclei, fast-moving cosmic rays.
So heavy nuclei being stuff that's not hydrogen, helium,
it's like
heavier elements.
Carbon, oxygen, iron, those kinds of things. 99% of the cosmic rays are electrons and protons. 1% are the helium nuclei. We're talking about the stuff that's heavier than helium. And
this stuff just pervades the galaxy. I mean, it's not rare or unusual that we're in the cosmic radiation. It's just that Earth's magnetosphere shields us from it here on the surface.
It shields us from it, but the heart of the experiment was, let's see what happens to these mice when we expose them to what an astronaut would experience outside the Earth's magnetosphere.
So if we can dig into that, I mean, what sorts of problems did they have? Obviously, if you've got, you're looking at the interior of the stomachs, is correct?
Right.
What sort of damage happened there that's causing the problems?
Well, they were able to publish in detail the kind of gut-wrenching effects you experience. Probably the biggest thing is that you disturb the movement of certain critical cells that go up and down the intestinal tract. Okay. And when you disturb that movement, it opens up your digestive tissues to pathogenic invasion. And so
are these just kind of like sweeper cells, if you will, that kind of clean things off?
They do. They protect you from the pathogenic microbes that are inside your gut. Okay. And so when that is disrupted, suddenly these pathogens can penetrate the intestinal wall, and that begins to have an impact on the rest of the body. And also, the movement of these cells protects you against tumor development. So what they notice is that even in a space of a few months, tumors were growing. And moreover, what they notice is they would do the experiment for 3 months, then take the mouse outside of that environment. But what they notice is the impact lasted another year. In other words, the consequences would continue for a full year after a 3-month exposure. So even
That's remarkable.
So even if you were out there for 3 months, you're going to have another year of significant consequences.
You know what I find interesting about that is that even if, if we're talking about anything outside our solar system, that the closest star, even traveling at 1/10 the speed of light, would take us 40 years to get there, the types of damage you're going to have, not only are you going to have the damage there, but even if once you get there and get out of the radiation environment, you're going to have those consequences for a long time after that, is what it sounds like.
That's exactly what it's sounding like. Like the fastest trip we can make to Mars is 6 months if you pick the right window of time to go. Okay. But what this paper is saying is, even at a 6-month trip, you're probably looking at astronauts that are going to be experience such gut-wrenching consequences. They will not be able to function, and they might even be dead by the time they get to Mars. Bottom line is, it's a great paper telling us we're far better off sending machines to Mars than trying to send people. We already know it's way cheaper, but this paper is basically saying it's simply not possible to send a human being to Mars where they can do anything.
Let me take a step back. If you could just take a few seconds and elaborate on a point you stated fairly briefly, is that we're looking at mice, but you said that mice are a pretty good analog or a way to study what's going on with the human digestive tract. Obviously, we can't do these sorts of experiments on humans. But what about mice makes it so amenable to study how humans are going to respond?
Well, notice that mice and rats are omnivores just like we are. And so their digestive tract is designed so that they can survive on a vegan diet or a meat diet or a combination. Well, we're the same. And it's remarkable how similar the digestive tract of mice and rats are to human beings, which is why they're a favorite animal for using for medical research. And I think it's part of the Creator's blessing to us. He designed these animals in such a way that they have such a close analog to a human body. We can use them for medical research rather than human beings.
Well, thanks, Hugh. I appreciate your comments. You know, we talk about wanting to space travel, and that just pervades our culture. But when we investigate how difficult it is to actually carry out that space travel, one of the interesting consequences is we see just how remarkably well-designed Earth is to shield us from all the perils of space travel. You know, I would encourage you to go check out Hugh's blog on this topic. Go to reasons.org and search for "Is Gut-Wrenching Space Travel Possible?" And you will be better equipped to share the remarkable design features of Earth to tell others about the Creator.
That does it for us this week on 2819.
We had a blast, and we hope you did too, and we hope that you're also encouraged to share your faith with confidence and compassion.
And remember, if you want to support resources like this show or just get more information about this show or past episodes, please visit reasons.org/2819.
And don't forget, grab your phone right now or get on your computer and connect with us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at 2819 Show.
I'll be looking for all those new likes and comments. See you next time.